Hi everybody and welcome back to Exotics of the World TV. Now, what is cute, fluffy, small, and is an incredible acrobat? Yes, that's right, we are talking about Regal's jumping spiders in this care guide today. So, the care that we're going to be speaking about is kind of general for most North American species of jumping spider. So if you don't have a Regals, you have something quite similar. The care is basically going to be near enough exactly the same. These little guys are jam-packed full of personality and are super easy to care for. So if you've ever wanted a tiny spider as a pet or you're thinking about getting a jumping spider, then stick around for this video as we dive into everything you need to know about your tiny jumping spider. But anyway, that's enough from me. Please, as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the content. Now, let's first discuss where these spiders are in fact endemic to. Now, these guys can be found all the way through North America, so like the United States, parts of the Caribbean, and verging into some parts of South America. So what is the jumping spider's natural habitat? So jumping spiders can be found in a wide variety of different habitats. So you can find them in kind of like urban areas, so like cities, towns, villages, in and around like people and stuff. Like they're really truly masters of their own environment, along with like their more natural kind of setting. So things like forested areas, you can find them in like open plains and fields. You can find them around like bushes and stuff that are quite close to water, where they're going to eat lots of like insects and stuff. So yeah, so their habitat is quite wide and varied. So you're definitely going to be able to have a little bit of fun and play about with it. Unlike web building spiders, these guys don't spin webs to try and catch their prey. They'll spin webs to make kind of like little sleeping hammocks and stuff like that. They'll basically use their eyesight and they will pounce on their prey items. So if any of you guys have ever watched like Eight-Legged Freaks from like way back in the day, awful B movie, but one of my absolute favorites. I think the spider guy in that calls it like an arachnid attack, which I think is quite cool. So I'm just going to be using that. So they'll use a arachnid attack to try and eat their prey. So because of this, they have to have specially kind of like adapted eyes. So there are a couple of parts to the eye. So they'll have like two really big eyes at the front, which are the things that most people find like the most adorable about them. So they're the things that are going to like zoom in and really look at the prey items. And then they have other eyes on the sides of their head. Now, this is just like for peripheral vision. So they're not going to see that well out of them, but they're going to notice if anything goes by. If I'm like kind of like waving here, I can kind of see that. I'm not good. I can't see the detail on there, but I know something's there. So they're going to turn around and they're going to see what's going on. So how big do jumping spiders get? So depending on the species, so we're just going to go like Regals because they're like one of the larger species. So they'll get around about thumbnail size. So there is a little bit of size difference between males and females. So females will typically grow around about 22 millimeters. So still fairly small. So about 2 centimeters or so. And then the males will get a little bit smaller, around about 15 mil. There's also a little bit of like coloration difference between like the sexes. So typically female jumping spiders are a little bit more colorful. So how long do jumping spiders live for? Now, this is the really sad part. They don't live that long, unfortunately. So anywhere from around about a year to 3 years, that's kind of like your ballpark. So this is dependent on a couple of factors. So general husbandry and like overall care. So like temperature, humidity, ventilation, diet. These are all going to be contributing factors that are going to aid your animal in its longevity. So something quite cool about jumping spiders is like they are fairly intelligent for invertebrates. So to the point where they can start to like recognize like certain things and certain objects. Now, let's talk about the general size of the enclosure for this species. So there's a lot out there. So people say that the bigger the enclosure, they don't like it, they'll not feed, etc., etc. Now, as with anything, the wild is a big place. It's a very big enclosure, probably one of the biggest enclosures that we can offer. So when the statement comes, can an enclosure be too big? And it's kind of like, yes, it can. Not necessarily. As long as you can know and make sure that your animal is kind of like feeding regular and you've seen it and whatnot, then that's absolutely fine. For those of you that are just starting out, you're very new to keeping, and you're not 100% sure, you can start off with something smaller. That's absolutely fine. More kind of like adventurous and advanced keepers can keep them in larger. So the minimum size that we would typically recommend like to start out with for this species is like one of like the standard like small acrylic enclosures. So with the enclosure, the design is going to be very, very important. So we wouldn't really recommend anything kind of like top opening, always kind of like front opening. The reason for this is that they'll make like little like silk hammocks and little sleeping bags kind of like at the tops of the enclosure. So if you're kind of like pulling out, you're going to annoy the spider. So always get something that's kind of like front opening. Also, what's really important is for the design of the enclosure, make sure it's well ventilated. These guys need a lot of ventilation. So most acrylic enclosures will come with kind of like side ventilation, or what we call cross ventilation, and on the top also. So I've already touched on it a little bit already. Now, ventilation is super, super, super key in the care of this animal. Too much moisture buildup in the enclosure can be quite dangerous for them. One, if you can see like droplets and stuff forming, like big droplets and stuff forming on like the inside of the enclosure, the animals can get stuck and potentially sometimes drown if your spider is quite small. Also, the more like wet and humid it is in there, the more likely we're going to see like fungal growth, which can also have a negative impact on your animal's health. So always make sure that there is enough ventilation. If you're a little bit worried on, I'm not sure if I'm providing enough ventilation in there, what you can do, you can just get like a little PC like desktop fan, like if you're building one, and you can pop it on externally on the outside, just so it's blowing some nice air in. But most of the time, like the cross-sided ventilation enclosures are absolutely fine to use. Now, moving on to temperature. So what's the ideal temperature to keep these guys at? So anywhere from like 22 degrees to around about 28 degrees is absolutely fine for the daytime. And then in the nighttime, you can let them get a little bit cooler than that if you want to. Anywhere from like 18 is kind of like a standard safe kind of area. But if you want to drop it below 15, you can do. Now, this is going to depend on what species you have. Some species of jumping spider are a little bit more hardier than others. So just double check. But for a Regal's jumping spider, that should be absolutely fine. If you're finding that it is not getting up to temperature in your house, you can do a couple of things. So you can get like a small little heat mat or like a really tiny kind of heat lamp as well. Always make sure that any heat emitting source, just for safety, is on a thermostat. So this is the thing that's going to control the temperature. And the reason for this is because nobody wants a baked spider. Scooching on over to humidity. So these guys can tolerate it fairly dry, but do prefer it a little bit humid. So we would say anywhere from around about 50 to 80% humidity is absolutely fine. If you're noticing that it's going up and down, like the humidity and stuff, that's kind of what we're trying to aim for. That's what we're going to go for. So in terms of weeks, if you were to spray it, I'd probably say maybe 2 to 3 times a week. So just let the humidity get up there and then just don't spray for a couple of days just to let it get right down and kind of dry out a little bit. Just so the tank's going to go through these cycles. Let's now talk about the jumping spider's diet. So like with the majority of spiders, these guys are predators and they are going to eat live food, so live insects. So when they're small, fruit flies and curlywings and stuff like that are absolutely fine to feed. As your spider gets a little bit older and gets a little bit larger, you can move on to larger prey items. I wouldn't really recommend anything larger than kind of like a small locust. Anything bigger than that might be a little bit difficult for the animal to take down. Now, unlike reptiles and stuff, you don't have to supplement them. So you're not having to use like the calcium powders or anything like that. Literally just whack them straight in there and you should be absolutely fine. Now, in terms of feeding, how often are we going to feed our jumping spider? So this is going to depend on the age of the animal. So if you have a baby jumping spider, you're going to want to feed it at least like 3 to 4 times a week. If your spider is a little bit older and you're moving on to like larger prey items and stuff, then you can drop that down to once or maybe even twice a week. But again, this is going to depend on the age of the spider and as well the size of the live food items you are feeding it. Jumping spiders love to explore. So when it comes to like decoration, you can do all sorts of different bits and bobs. So if you go on Etsy, you can find really whimsical kind of like jumping spider assault courses and stuff that you can pop them on. And they will utilize them and they will use them. They do like to have a bit of fun like that. But in terms of the actual enclosure itself, again, probably noticed by now, I'm more of a natural bug. So what we would recommend, more kind of like natural kind of things. But if you want to put novelty items in there or whimsical stuff, then you can do. That's absolutely fine. As long as the animal can interact with it in like a safe and novel way, then you should be absolutely fine. But what I would do, I would add things like branches, cork bark, maybe even live plants, fake plants if you can't keep them alive, and also tiny little hiding areas in there for them. So not only is it going to be beneficial for the animal so it feels safe and it can hide, but also if you put a few like live food items in there, like maybe even some fruit flies, and they go scarpering and wandering, the animal can then find them later on. And there you have it. So thank you very much for watching all the way through to the end of this care guide video. If you did like the content, please make sure that you give us a like, share and subscribe, and hit that bell icon and you'll be notified when we release new videos. But anyway, that's been enough from me. Thank you very much for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Ta-ra!